It's late at night, and you're driving alone on a dark road. Suddenly, a car behind you flashes its high beams, trying to get your attention. But you don't know what they want, and they will not back off. After several terrifying minutes, you see a gas station up ahead. You pull into the gas station and quickly rush into the store. A man jumps out of the car that's been following you and runs into the store behind you. He nervously explains that he saw someone in your back seat with a hatchet. As you look out the store window, you see a figure leaving your car from the back door. The figure runs off into the nearby woods, leaving nothing but a shadow to haunt your memories for the rest of your life. It's a classic, right? The killer in the back seat. If you spent any time telling ghost stories at summer camps or listening to playground rumors growing up, you know that exact narrative by heart. And for decades, it has worked flawlessly. It hits us right in a place of deep modern vulnerability. The absolute panic of being followed on an empty highway only to realize the real danger is sitting just a few inches behind your head. But urban legends aren't just scary stories to pass the time. They're a form of cultural shorthand. They take our everyday environments, our cars, our quiet suburban neighborhoods, our local history, and they twist them to see how easily we fracture under the pressure. And like any good mystery, these stories have layers. Most people like to stay right on the surface. They know the Hollywood stuff. They know the standard boogeymen. But if you start pulling on the threads of collective folklore, you'll find that the deeper you go, the more the monsters fade away, and the more you're left looking at institutional failures, historical anomalies, and things that crawled out of a real city archive. And they're much worse than a guy in your back seat with a hatchet. Welcome back to Chilled Bones. Today, we are taking a descent down the urban legends iceberg. We're going to start right here on the surface with the pop culture myths you think you know. Then we're going to lower the crane all the way down into deep-tier psychological terrors, localized mass hysterias, and reality glitches that no one has a logical explanation for. So pour your favorite beverage of choice, double-check your locks, and join me as we dive beneath the surface into the murky depths of urban legends. But before we head down there, I need something from you. There's a like and subscribe button right here, and it would be wonderful if you would click both. I'll be putting up strange and unusual content weekly, and if you're as weird as I am, which I imagine you are, you'll definitely be interested to see what comes next. Also, if you like to read stories that will terrify your mind and keep you awake for days, I invite you to check out my novels. I've written several of them, all with the intention of scaring you half to death. You can find out more about my books and stories at chilledbones.com. I do appreciate your support very much. Now let's begin, shall we? Tier 1, the surface. We begin on the sunlit surface of collective pop culture. These are the legends that are practically institutionalized, the ones that have inspired countless horror franchises, decades of schoolyard dares, and annual local news panics. But as we peel back the layers of these familiar campfire stories, you'll start to see that our collective psychology has a habit of fracturing over the simplest things: technical gaps, biological glitches, and good old neighborly paranoia. So let's start with a classic sleepover ritual, Bloody Mary. If you grew up anywhere near a suburban middle school, you know the rules. You slip into a pitch black bathroom, light a single candle, stare directly into the mirror, and chant her name. Depending on how patient your friends were, you said the name somewhere between 3 and 13 times. Legend says a malevolent, mutilated spirit will materialize in the glass, clawing your face or dragging you into the mirror world forever. It's the ultimate playground dare. But the reality behind this legend isn't supernatural at all. It's actually a localized glitch in your own biological hardware. Psychologists point to a phenomenon called the Troxler effect, mixed with something known as the Capgras delusion. When you stare into a mirror under low flickering light, your brain's visual processing system gets incredibly bored. Without bright light and movement, your neural pathways start to lose track of the boundaries of your own face. To compensate, your brain starts misinterpreting shadows, stitching together unrelated visual data, and literally fabricating a monster out of your own reflection. You aren't summoning a centuries-old witch. Your brain is just terrible at processing low-light data and hallucinates a demon because it panicked, turning a basic sensory deprivation trick into a multi-generational boogeyman. Plus, you already have it in your head that something terrible is about to kill you, so there's that. Now, I know there's a certain amount of you out there that could stare into a dark mirror and say her name all night long, but I'm sure as hell not crazy enough to join you. Leave me a comment below if you understand where I'm coming from, or if you've ever said her name enough times to get your face half clawed off. Our next legend in Tier 1 is Polybius, the mind control cabinet. Moving from the bathroom mirror to the neon lights of the 1980s, we hit the internet's favorite retro urban legend, Polybius. The story goes that in 1981, a mysterious new stand-up arcade game popped up in a few suburbs in Portland, Oregon. The game featured strange, abstract geometric shapes and intense photoacoustic audio. Players allegedly suffered from amnesia, insomnia, night terrors, and a sudden intense hatred of video games. Even weirder, witnesses claimed that men in crisp black suits were spotted visiting arcades, not to collect quarters, but to harvest data from the machines. Within a month, the game completely vanished from our existence, leaving behind a lingering rumor of a CIA mind control experiment. It's a perfect conspiracy cocktail. But the real history here is a fascinating example of how separate events get stitched together over time. Back in 1981, video games were a brand new, highly intensive visual medium. A few kids in Portland generally did get sick in arcades, but it was from like localized epileptic seizures and severe migraines caused by screen flicker of standard games like Tempest. And those men in black suits, they were real too. Federal agents were actively raiding Portland arcades around that exact time because local mafia elements were using arcade machines for illicit gambling operations and money laundering. Decades later, early internet forums took real migraines, real FBI raids, and a healthy dose of Cold War paranoia and synthesized it into a perfect myth about a subliminal government superweapon. There was this old techie guy in my neighborhood who tried to make his own stand-up arcade game once. No one ever played it. I wonder if he had some sinister motivation behind it. Come to think of it, I think he did get arrested for something at one point. Next up in Tier 1 is a super classic, The Babysitter and the Upstairs Caller. This is the foundational myth of the modern slasher genre. A teenage girl is babysitting in a large, quiet suburban home at night. The kids are asleep upstairs. The phone rings. A creepy, raspy voice on the other end asks a single question. Have you checked the children? She hangs up. It happens again and again. Terrified, she finally calls the telephone operator to report the harassment. A few minutes later, the phone rings back. It's the operator, screaming frantically. "We traced the call. Get out of the house. It's coming from inside the house." This legend inspired the 1974 slasher movie Black Christmas and the 1979 horror film When a Stranger Calls, and basically every other horror trope you've ever seen. But if you look at it critically, this is a horror story built entirely on the monumental failure of mid-20th century telecommunications. The horror in this story relies on the fact that back in the 1960s and 70s, tracing a telephone call took an astronomical amount of time, required manual switchboards, and telecom companies charged a massive premium just to tell you who was dialing your house. The real monster isn't just the guy lurking in the attic, it's the absence of caller ID. Most of you young people will never understand this feeling, but there used to be a genuine anticipation every time the phone rang, and everyone in the house would stumble over each other in a violent dash to see what important person might be calling. These days, we don't even have our ringers turned on. But really, what kind of savage doesn't send a text? Seriously. Now let's look at the very real origin of this legend. The murder of Janet Christman. While the concept of a killer calling from a separate line in the house became popular as phone technology evolved in the 1960s and 70s, the raw physical terror of this urban legend traces back to March 18, 1950, in Columbia, Missouri. 13-year-old Janet Christman was babysitting a 3-year-old boy at the home of the Romack family. Late that evening, the local police department received a frantic phone call. A young girl was screaming into the receiver, completely hysterical, but before the operator could gather her name or location, the line went dead. Since mid-20th century phone tracking was virtually non-existent, the police had no way of knowing where the call originated from. When the Romacks returned home later that night, they found the side door of their house open and a window broken. Janet Christman had been assaulted and strangled to death in the living room. Miraculously, the 3-year-old child upstairs was left completely untouched and asleep in his bed. The investigation revealed that Janet had fought desperately for her life, and the blunt force trauma to her head suggested she was attacked while trying to reach the telephone. The police had a prime suspect, a 27-year-old acquaintance of the family who knew Janet and knew she would be babysitting alone that night. But due to a botched investigation and lack of physical evidence, no one was ever convicted. The case remains officially unsolved. But now here's how the tragedy wraps into folklore. The brutal nature of the Christman murder sent shockwaves through suburban America. It shattered the post-war illusion that children were perfectly safe inside locked suburban homes. As the story was passed down through the 1950s and 60s by word of mouth, collective anxiety did what it always does, and it adapted the details to fit contemporary fears. The real-life panic of a babysitter desperately trying to call out for help morphed into a stalker aggressively calling from another line inside the house. By the time the legend reached the 1970s, the narrative adopted the urban element of modern telecommunications. Folklore wrapped the tragedy in a neat cinematic twist, introducing the anonymous caller, the mechanical tracing delay, and the terrifying realization that the danger wasn't outside in the dark, but was already inside the perimeter. Ultimately, the myth exists because of Janet Christman. It took a teenager's real, desperate, untraceable cry for help and turned it into a cautionary tale about the illusion of safety. The next legend on deck in Tier 1 literally gets under my skin and makes me sick. Poison Halloween candy. Finally, on Tier 1, we're going to look at an urban legend that actively dictates real-world behavior every single year. Every Halloween, suburban neighborhoods across America undergo a massive synchronized ritual of collective paranoia. Parents meticulously scan fun-sized Snicker bars under the kitchen light, feeling for structural punctures in the wrapper and summarily tossing out homemade cookies straight into the trash. The fear is always the same. A sadistic, faceless stranger down the street is trying to poison your kids or slip a razor blade into their candied apples just for the cruel thrill of it. Sociologists have tracked this phenomenon for decades. And statistically, it's a total myth. There is almost zero historical evidence of a random stranger ever distributing lethal poison candy to random children on Halloween. But the reason I say almost zero, and the reason this urban legend isn't completely unthinkable, is because of one man. Ronald Clark O'Brien. On Halloween night in 1974, in a suburb of Houston, Texas, O'Brien took his 2 children trick-or-treating. At one point in the night, he walked up to a dark, unlit house and came back holding 5 giant 21-inch pixie sticks. He handed them out to his kids and a few of their friends. Before bed, his 8-year-old son, Timothy, asked for a treat. O'Brien handed him one of the pixie sticks, even helping the boy loosen the powdered sugar inside the straw. Timothy complained that the candy tasted bitter. Minutes later, he was convulsing on the bathroom floor. Tragically, the boy died on the way to the hospital. The autopsy revealed that the top 2 inches of the pixie sticks had been packed with a lethal dose of potassium cyanide. Panic absolutely ripped through the state of Texas. Parents went into a frenzy, scouting their kids' plastic pumpkins, terrified that a localized serial killer was hunting children. Police scrambled to find the other 4 straws before anyone could ingest them. Luckily, they recovered them all, unopened. But when investigators went to find the sadistic stranger who handed out the candy, O'Brien's story completely fell apart. The homeowner of the dark house had an airtight alibi. He wasn't even in the city that night. So the police started looking at O'Brien. They discovered he was over $100,000 in debt. They found out he had been fired from over 20 jobs in a decade. And, most damning of all, they discovered that just weeks before Halloween, O'Brien had quietly taken out massive life insurance policies on his own children. He didn't just try to kill his son. He distributed those other 4 poisoned pixie sticks to his daughter and his neighbor's children just to create the illusion that a random boogeyman was loose in the neighborhood. He was willing to butcher a handful of local kids to cover up his own financial fraud. O'Brien was convicted of capital murder, executed by lethal injection in 1984. The media dubbed him the Candy Man, but history remembers him by a much heavier title, The Man Who Killed Halloween. On a personal note, I really hope hell exists, because if anyone deserves a one-way ticket to the Lake of Fire and the gnashing of teeth for eternity, it's Ronald Clark O'Brien. And that's the last time I'm ever going to say this jerk-off's name. So there's the dark anatomy of a Tier 1 urban legend. The myth tells us to lock our doors, look at our neighbors with suspicion. But the historical reality is much more terrifying. The monster isn't a stranger hiding in the shadows of a suburban street. The monster is the desperate man standing right inside your own house, holding the flashlight. Tier 1 is oddly comfortable. We like these stories because they have clear rules. Don't look in the mirror. Check your back seat before you get in the car. Don't eat unsealed Halloween candy. But as we lower the crane down to Tier 2, the rules start to dissolve. The legends start bleeding out of the schoolyards and straight into real-world police files, corrupted geographic spaces, and rogue institutional experiments. Let's drop down to Tier 2, where the water is cooler, darker, and much more unpredictable. Tier 2, Real Places, Real Legends. As we cross the threshold into Tier 2, the playground rules fade away. We are leaving behind the world of simple internet campfire ghost stories and stepping into the domain of corrupted physical spaces, regional anomalies, and folklore that has explicitly tangled with newspaper archives, police files, and local municipal history. These legends are unsettling because they are anchored in real coordinates on a map, places you can actually drive to, walk through, and verify with your own eyes. We'll start Tier 2 with the legend of the Bunnyman Bridge. If you drive down to Clifton, Virginia, and head toward the remote Colchester Overpass, you'll find yourself at a low concrete railway tunnel cutting through the thick woods. In local lore, this is the home of the Bunnyman. The legend states that in 1904, an asylum transport bus crashed nearby. One inmate escaped, surviving in the wilderness by hunting wild rabbits. Soon, residents began finding gutted rabbit carcasses hanging from the overpass. Eventually, the story shifted into a full-blown boogeyman saga, an axe-wielding figure dressed in a filthy white rabbit suit who hunts down teenagers trespassing near the tracks at night. The asylum bus crash never happened, but the physical terror behind this legend is entirely documented. In October of 1970, the Fairfax County Police Department received two deeply bizarre reports. First, an Air Force cadet and his fiancée were parked near the tracks when a man dressed in a white suit with bunny ears sprinted out of the darkness, screamed that they were trespassing, and hurled a hatchet straight through their back window. Weeks later, a security guard encountered the same rabbit-eared figure standing on the porch of an unfinished house, hacking at the wooden pillars with a long-handled axe. This bunny man was never apprehended. So over the decades, a very real, deeply unsettling police investigation involving a local psychopath wielding a hatchet mutated into a supernatural ghost story. The municipal authorities eventually had to install active security measures at the bridge just to keep hundreds of thrill-seeking teenagers from flooding the rural road every Halloween. Now, being the horror nut that I am, I totally plan on finding this place and exploring it. I mean, I have to, right? Like, for science, right? Next up in Tier 2 is the legend of the Melon Heads. This takes place in Ohio, Michigan, and Connecticut. One of the most widespread regional myths in America centers on the Melon Heads, feral humanoids with massive, fluid-filled skulls said to haunt isolated country roads across 3 different states. The folklore claims these creatures are the descendants of orphans who escaped a rogue medical facility where a mad scientist conducted cruel, experimental surgeries on them. While you won't find a single police report documenting face-to-face contact with a feral humanoid, the historical paper trail reveals that the Melon Heads are a psychological manifestation of suburban encroachment and deep-seated institutional dread. I'll explain. In Kirkland, Ohio, teenagers tell stories of a Dr. Crow who experimented on orphans along Windsor Road. Property records show that there never was a Dr. Crow, but a highly eccentric physician named Dr. William King did establish a private hospital on his estate there in the early 20th century. By the 1960s and 70s, as modern subdivisions crept toward the property, local teenagers began trespassing at the abandoned facility. Police logs from that area are packed with citations for vandalism and underage drinking. The Melon Heads then became a narrative shield, a scary story teenagers used to justify creeping through the dark ruins of an old hospital in the middle of the night. I can't lie. I did stupid shit like this all the time when I was a teenager. For the kids in my area, our spooky legend was an old church called the Quaker Church. There was supposed to be a satanic cult who operated out of the church, but the only thing we ever found while roaming around out there in the dark was just more idiot kids like us. But we at least got some good memories out of it. I went home for a class reunion not too long ago, and one of my old friends said, "Hey, we should go out to the old Quaker church tonight." I said, "We're adults in our 50s. That's ridiculous." So 2 hours later, 6 of us so-called adults were out there in the middle of the night with a six-pack and flashlights. Don't judge, because you know, if you watch this video so far, you've done this same exact thing too. Leave me a comment about your own urban legend adventures. I'd love to hear about it. The next Melonhead legend is Laketown Township, Michigan, and a myth that centers on the woods surrounding the historic Felt Estate, where alleged creatures escaped from a local insane asylum. Public records instantly clear up the mystery. There was no insane asylum, but the property did carry an intense institutional reputation. In the 1970s, the state converted part of the estate into a maximum security prison that also housed inmates with severe mental health issues. Local newspaper archives from that era document severe community anxiety regarding the prison, especially following a few inmate escapes. The Melonhead sightings were a psychological mutilation of the town's very real fear of escaped convicts lurking in the forest. And in Fairfield County, Connecticut, the legends haunt Velvet Street, historically known as Dracula Drive. Here, the roots trace back to 19th century newspaper documentation of a real person, the Leatherman. From 1856 to 1889, this mute, mysterious wanderer walked a continuous 365-mile circuit between the Connecticut and Hudson rivers, dressed entirely in heavy handmade leather suits and sleeping in local caves. Because he was an eccentric, silent wilderness outcast, suburban parents in the 20th century distorted his memory, turning him into a monstrous boogeyman to scare their children into staying out of unlit rural roads and out of those old caves. The documentation doesn't reveal monsters. It reveals a generational cycle of teenagers driving to the edge of town, getting spooked by the dark history of their own municipal borders, and blaming their imaginations on the Melonheads. Now we're going to move into the third legend in this tier. Cropsey, Staten Island, New York. For decades, the ultimate urban legend parents used to terrify children in New York was the legend of Cropsey. Cropsey was described as a hook-handed maniac, an escaped patient from a mental institution who lived in the abandoned subterranean tunnels beneath Staten Island. Parents warned their kids that if they went out past dark or wandered into the woods near the old sprawling New York State Institute, famously known as the Willowbrook State School, Cropsey would snatch them up and drag them underground. This is the point of the iceberg where the line between urban legend and real-world horror completely disintegrates, because Cropsey was real. The Willowbrook State School was a state-run institution for children with intellectual disabilities that became a national scandal in 1972 when investigative journalist Geraldo Rivera sneaked inside with a camera crew. What he exposed was a living hell. The footage revealed unthinkable filth, thousands of children left naked and covered in their own waste, rampant medical neglect, physical abuse, and absolute institutional rot. Robert F. Kennedy Sr. had previously toured the facility and called it a snake pit. While the public outrage eventually forced the state to slowly shut the facility down, its massive brutalist concrete campus was left to decay in the middle of Staten Island's isolated greenbelt. As the buildings crumbled and the woods reclaimed the brickwork, local myth of Cropsy intensified. Kids whispered that patients who had escaped from the horrors of Willowbrook were still living like ghosts in the abandoned underground steam tunnels that connected the campus buildings. But in the late 1970s and 80s, the boogeyman left the realm of teenage folklore. Children began vanishing from Staten Island, and the local community descended into an absolute breathless panic. The nightmare solidified into flesh and blood with the disappearance of 12-year-old Jennifer Schweiger in July of 1987. Jennifer, who had Down syndrome, disappeared while out for a walk. A massive community search party mobilized, combing through the densely overgrown, heavily wooded grounds of the defunct Willowbrook campus. After weeks of searching, a volunteer made a horrific discovery. Jennifer's shallow grave was uncovered just a short distance away from a makeshift campsite in the woods. Living in that campsite was a man named Andre Rand. When the police dragged Rand out of the brush, Staten Island realized they weren't dealing with a phantom. Rand was a former Willowbrook employee who had worked as a ward attendant at the school during its most abusive eras. After the facility closed, he had literally rejected society, moving into subterranean tunnels of the abandoned campus and setting up camp in the ruins of his former workplace. He was an unhinged transient figure, frequently seen by locals roaming the perimeter of the woods, sometimes pushing a shopping cart or leading stray dogs. As investigators dug deeper, they realized Jennifer Schweiger wasn't his only suspected target. Rand became the primary suspect in a string of mysterious disappearances stretching back over a decade. In 1981, 7-year-old Holly Ann Hughes had vanished after going to a local deli. Witnesses later placed her in a vehicle with Rand. Other missing children like Alice Pereira in 1972 and Charlotte Hunt in 1973 were closely linked to his movements on the island. Rand was a real-world predator, hunting in the exact geographic space of the urban legend. While the lack of physical forensic evidence on the older cases made murder convictions incredibly difficult to secure, justice finally caught up with him. He was convicted of first-degree kidnapping in the Jennifer Schweiger case, and decades later, in 2004, he was convicted for the kidnapping of Holly Ann Hughes. He was sentenced to consecutive terms of 25 years to life, ensuring that he would never walk the streets of Staten Island again. The tragedy of Cropsey is a profound exploration of collective psychology. For years, the children of Staten Island invented a monster with a hook for a hand living in the woods to give a face to the eerie, heavy atmosphere of the abandoned Willowbrook ruins. They thought they were telling ghost stories, but the reality proved that the folklore we invent to scare children is often a psychological coping mechanism for a real-world horror that is far more calculated, predatory, and close to home. Our next legend in Tier 2 is the Black Angel of Iowa City. We close out Tier 2 by descending upon Oakland Cemetery in Iowa City, home to an imposing 8-foot-tall dark bronze monument known as the Black Angel. The statue features an angel with an uncharacteristically grim expression, her wings cast downward rather than pointing towards heaven. Local lore claims the statue is cursed. According to the Schoolyard Dare, if you touch the angel on Halloween, kiss her lips, or even walk beneath the shadow of her wings, you will be struck dead by a curse, or your body will instantly age decades. The physical monument is completely real, erected in 1913 by a grieving, eccentric Czech immigrant named Teresa Feldevert to mark the graves of her son and husband. Teresa was an outsider in the community, and her unusual, somber artistic taste immediately drew suspicion from the local population. When she passed away, her ashes were placed beneath the monument, and her date of death was never carved into the stone. A clerical omission that local teenagers interpret as a sign of dark witchcraft. As for the angel's terrifying color, it isn't a supernatural curse. The monument was cast in standard bronze, which naturally undergoes a severe chemical reaction called oxidation when exposed to the elements over a century. The rain and air gradually turn the shining metal into a dark, charred black. The Black Angel is a monument to how community xenophobia, natural chemical decay, and the profound isolation of a grieving outsider can curdle an innocent memorial into a permanent epicenter of dark regional folklore. Tier 2 shows us what happens when our stories find an anchor in real geographic spaces. But as we prepare to lower the crane down into Tier 3, the Midnight Zone, we leave the regional boogeyman behind. We're going to drop down into the realm of high strangeness and reality glitches, historical events so clinically and deeply bizarre that even the official archives don't know what to do with them. Let's head down to Tier 3, shall we? Tier 3, the Midnight Zone. As we descend into Tier 3, the Midnight Zone, we leave behind the regional boogeyman of the woods and step into the unsettling world of modern infrastructure, consumer technology, and industrial mass hysterias. These are the classics, pure urban legends passed around by word of mouth, online forums, and office lunch rooms that something that happened to a friend of a friend of a friend or a cousin of somebody's sister-in-law. They're terrifying because they suggest that the ordinary mass-produced systems we rely on for comfort and convenience are secretly hiding something deeply wrong. The first legend in Tier 3, the body under the bed. You check into a mid-tier hotel or a busy highway motel, ready to unwind after a long day of travel. But the moment you shut the door, you're hit by a faint, sickening chemical stench. You call down to the front desk to complain, but the staff brushes it off, sending up a housekeeper to spray heavy industrial air freshener or burn a stick of incense. You try to sleep, but as the hours tick by, the air freshener scent fades, and the rot grows so thick you can practically taste it. Finally, unable to take it anymore, you turn on the lights, rip the sheets off the bed, and flip the heavy mattress over. There, stuffed inside the hollow plastic box spring or welded into the metal frame directly beneath where you were resting your head moments ago, is a decaying human corpse. This is the ultimate corporate apocalypse urban legend. And for decades, people assumed it was just a campfire tale designed to make travelers uncomfortable. But this is one of those moments along the iceberg where the folklore is 100% real. In fact, it's happened dozens of times in tourism hubs all over the globe. To understand how a massive commercial business can allow a human being to decompose right underneath the noses of paying customers, you only have to look at the police archives. Take the tragic case of Sonny Millbrook in Memphis, Tennessee. In January of 2010, Sonny, a mother of 5, suddenly went missing. Her family frantically tried to investigate, even asking the staff at the Budget Inn motel where she had been staying to let them look inside the room. The hotel refused. For the next 47 days, the motel staff claimed the room was regularly cleaned, wiped down, and vacuumed. In fact, the room was rented out to completely unsuspecting guests at least 5 separate times. Guests slept, watched TV, and lived in that room entirely oblivious to the fact that Sonny's body had been crammed directly into the metal box frame beneath the mattress the entire time. It wasn't until 2 months later, when the odor became an undeniable biohazard, that management finally investigated the frame. If you think that's an isolated incident, shift your attention to a traveler's hotel near Miami International Airport. A German tourist checked into his room and immediately noticed a foul, suffocating odor. When he complained, the staff told him the room had just been sanitized and offered to spray some extra deodorizer to mask the smell. The tourist refused to accept the excuse, took matters into his own hands, and pulled the mattress off the platform frame. Tucked directly beneath his sleeping quarters was the body of 24-year-old Josefina Martinez, who had been murdered and stashed there days prior. At least 2 other occupants had already spent the night in that exact bed, with her remains just inches below their pillow. This legend functions as a biting piece of institutional critique. It exposes our deep-seated anxiety regarding corporate indifference and automated negligence. It forces us to confront the reality that the hospitality industry is a machine designed for rapid turnover and daily occupancy rates. A room is scrubbed just enough to look clean for the next credit card swipe, while the deep structural reality of the space is entirely ignored. You aren't safe or cared for in a locked hotel room. You're just a paying metric sleeping on top of a horror scene the system is actively trying to pave over with industrial strength Febreze. And don't dare turn on a black light in one of these terrible places. But that's a horror story for another time. Next up in Tier 3 is the legend of the Phantom Smart Device. You're sitting alone in your living room late at night. The house is completely silent. Suddenly, out of a dark corner in the room, your smart speaker lets out a sharp, unprovoked, echoing burst of manic human laughter. You freeze, waiting for the device to say it didn't understand a command, but it just falls dead silent again, its blue light ring pulsing in the dark. Or perhaps you're a parent asleep in bed. At 2 a.m., a strange, deep voice wakes you. It's coming from the nursery monitor on your nightstand. You listen closely, paralyzed, as a completely anonymous stranger speaks directly through the speaker to your sleeping infant, saying, "Wake up, little baby. Daddy's looking for you." This is the definitive urban legend of the digital age. It has completely replaced the old myths of ghosts or demons whispering from the floorboards. Instead, the horror is entirely consumer-driven. But if you think these are just viral creepypastas cooked up on Reddit forums, you need to look at what happens when these mass-produced consumer systems actually glitch. In early 2018, Amazon was forced to issue an emergency software patch after a terrifying wave of global reports flooded customer service lines. Across the world, completely unprompted, Amazon Echo devices were spontaneously bursting into sinister, lifelike human laughter. In some cases, users would ask Alexa to perform a basic task, like turning off the lights or something, only for the speaker to refuse and simply laugh at them. In other instances, the device would just trigger in the middle of the night in an empty room, waking up families with an eerie, disembodied cackle. Amazon later admitted that the speaker's microphones were misinterpreting ordinary background noises or common words as specific phrases like "Alexa, laugh," triggering a low-level coding error that simulated a literal ghost in the machine. But while the Alexa laughter was a corporate coding glitch, the urban legend of the nursery monitor is something far more sinister. A documented cybersecurity nightmare. In 2019, a family in Mississippi installed a popular internet-connected smart camera in their daughter's bedroom to keep an eye on them. Only days later, the mother heard a strange thumping noise coming from her room. When she looked through the door, her 8-year-old daughter was standing in the center of the room, completely terrified. A strange man's voice was broadcasting loudly out of the camera speaker. The hacker had hijacked the system and was actively playing the theme song from the horror movie Insidious into the room before speaking directly to the young girl, trying to convince her that he was Santa Claus and telling her that she should destroy her room. Investigators later revealed that malicious actors were utilizing specialized credential stuffing software, scanning the dark web for old leaked passwords from unrelated website data breaches, and automatically testing them against modern smart home apps until they bypassed the security wall. The legend exploits our profound vulnerability regarding mass surveillance and the smart technology we willingly purchase. We have voluntarily packed our private living spaces with internet-connected cameras, microphones, and data harvesting sensors for the sake of basic conveniences. This urban legend acts as a psychological immune response to that invasive reality. It reminds us of a terrifying truth. By building the perfect interconnected smart home, we have built the ultimate untrackable infrastructure for an invisible, faceless stalker to sit right beside us in the dark. Okay, let's put that nightmare scenario behind us and move on to the third urban legend in this tier, the crying boy painting curse. In the 1980s, a bizarre panic swept across the United Kingdom. It centered on a cheap, mass-produced print of a painting titled The Crying Boy, which depicted a sad orphan with a single tear rolling down his cheek. The urban legend stated that the painting carried a malicious, fiery curse. Rumors exploded in the local tabloids that homes displaying the artwork would inexplicably ignite, burning completely to the ground. The truly terrifying detail passed between neighbors was that when the firefighters sifted through the smoldering ashes of these destroyed houses, the painting of the crying boy would always be discovered completely unblemished, its canvas entirely untouched by the flames. This legend sparked a massive, media-fueled national hysteria. The panic became so severe that a major UK newspaper organized public bonfires, prompting terrified citizens to mail in tens of thousands of copies of the print to be publicly destroyed. But when scientists and fire investigators actually looked into the anomaly, the reality revealed a completely mundane industrial truth. During the mass production of the prints in the mid-20th century, the manufacturing company had treated the surface of the canvas with a cheap fire-retardant polymer varnish. When these poorly insulated mid-century homes caught fire, the hanging strings would burn through instantly, causing the painting to fall face down onto the floorboards. The chemical varnish insulated the face of the painting from the rising heat, allowing it to survive the blaze. It's a perfect example of a Tier 3 urban legend, a basic overlooked detail in industrial manufacturing completely curled into a nationwide supernatural curse by a public desperate to find a monster in the ashes. Tier 3 shows us that the systems we build to keep ourselves comfortable are fragile, compromised, and deeply unsettling when they glitch. But as we prepare to lower the crane down to the final layer, Tier 4, the abyss, the technology and the infrastructure fade away completely. We're leaving behind the world of modern conveniences and dropping into the darkest depths of human history and collective psychology, looking at what happens when human nature completely unravels and the urban legends become an active reflection of our own capacity for horror. Let's head down. Tier 4. The Abyss. We're going to start out Tier 4 with this fun scenario. You're traveling for business in an unfamiliar, bustling city. After a grueling day of meetings, you head down to the high-end lounge in your hotel lobby to unwind. The atmosphere is sophisticated, the lighting is low, and before long you strike up a conversation with an attractive, charming stranger. They buy you a drink. You take a few sips, but within minutes, a wave of intense, unnatural dizziness washes over you. The room spins, your limbs turn to lead, and the entire world cuts to black. Hours later, you gasp for air as your eyes snap open. You're freezing, shivering violently. You realize you're lying flat on your back inside a porcelain hotel bathtub, buried up to your chest in a mountain of melting ice cubes. Your mind frantically tries to piece together where you are. Then you notice a cell phone resting on the closed toilet lid next to you. Taped directly to the bathroom mirror is a frantic, handwritten note in black bold marker. Don't try to stand up. Don't look down. Call 911 immediately. Your kidney has been surgically removed. Terrified, you reach back and touch your lower torso, feeling the thick, crude, freshly stitched laceration weeping into the ice water. This story, alternately known as the Kidney Heist or the Ice Bathtub, is arguably the most famous, enduring, contemporary myth of the digital age. It is a definitive modern folklore masterpiece. Ever since it began circulating via early internet news groups and corporate fax chains in the early 1990s, it has been passed around as the strict cautionary warning about the dangers of traveling alone and trusting strangers. But when you deconstruct the myth, the medical reality of the ice bathtub quickly falls apart. Organ transplantation is one of the most highly complex, precarious procedures in modern medicine. You can't successfully harvest a viable human kidney in a shitty motel bathroom with a pocket knife and a bucket of gas station ice. It requires a fully sterile, multi-million-dollar surgical theater, a specialized team of nephrologists, anesthesiologists, and perfusionists, and immediate temperature-controlled rapid transfer protocol to get the organ into a perfectly matched waiting recipient before the tissue dies. Simple enough, right? So where did this terrifying narrative actually come from? The exact origin of the urban legend can be traced back to the late 1980s and early 1990s. In 1989, a Turkish man named Ahmet Kok publicly claimed that his kidney had been covertly stolen from him while he was undergoing a completely unrelated medical procedure at a hospital. A massive media frenzy ensued, but a subsequent police investigation uncovered a far more cynical truth. Koch hadn't been targeted by a phantom syndicate. He had willingly sold his own kidney to a black market broker for cash and fabricated the theft only after he was deeply dissatisfied with the final payout he received. By March of 1991, folklorists officially cataloged the first American iterations of the ice bathtub chain letters. The myth spread so fast that it was immediately lifted by Hollywood, featuring as a core plot point in the 1993 thriller film The Harvest, and famously dramatized in an April 1991 episode of Law & Order titled Sonata for Solo Organ. The television broadcast acted as a massive megaphone, transforming a localized internet rumor into a nationwide panic. Yet, while the specific imagery of waking up in a tub of ice is a fictional construct, the dark underbelly of this urban legend is anchored to a horrific documented global reality: trafficking people for organ removal. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime documents that illegal organ harvesting is a thriving, brutal, multi-billion-dollar black market industry. But it doesn't happen to wealthy business travelers in high-end hotels. It targets the most desperate, vulnerable, and impoverished populations on Earth. In January 2008, international authorities shattered this urban legend's fiction by uncovering the devastating real-world equivalent, the Guggenheim kidney scandal. In India, a highly sophisticated criminal syndicate masterminded by a rogue medical practitioner named Dr. Amit Kumar had operated an illegal underground transplant racket for over 6 years. The criminal network didn't seduce strangers in bars. Instead, recruiters targeted destitute, low-income laborers from rural villages, luring them to an industrial township under the false pretense of offering them construction jobs or high-paying domestic work. Once the victims arrived at a heavily guarded residential bungalow, the trap snapped shut. The workers were held captive, threatened at gunpoint, or forcibly drugged and anesthetized against their will. They woke up not in a hotel bathtub, but on a makeshift operating table, their kidneys surgically extracted to be sold for tens of thousands of dollars to wealthy transplant tourists flying in from the West. The legend of the organ thief functions as a profound somatic morality tale. We live in a hyper-capitalistic modern world where almost everything can be bought, sold, and commodified. The ice bathtub myth survives because it taps into our ultimate visceral anxiety. The terrifying realization that your very biology, your flesh, your blood, your vital organs, can be treated like a stolen car, stripped down for valuable parts by a faceless network, and discarded in an empty room when the system is finally finished with you. Moving on. The second legend in Tier 4 is the AI voice clone scam. You're sound asleep in bed when your phone begins to vibrate aggressively on your nightstand at 2 a.m. You pick it up, noticing its unusual unlisted number. The moment you press the phone to your ear, a wave of cold horror floods your system. On the other end of the line, crying frantically through a wall of static, is the unmistakable exact voice of your child or grandchild. They're screaming in absolute terror. "Mom, please help me. They have a gun to my head. They're going to hurt me. Please just give them what they want." Before you can even process the panic, a deep, aggressive, distorted voice snatches the phone away. The extortionist barks a clinical set of instructions. You have exactly 30 minutes to wire thousands of dollars via cryptocurrency by untraceable digital apps, or your child will never come home. When they order you not to hang up, they warn you that if you try to call the police, it's over. For decades, the grandparent scam, or the virtual kidnapping trick, was a low-level, clumsy operation. Con artists would cold call elderly victims, use a generic, muffled voice, and hope the victim's aging hearing and natural panic would cause them to fill in the blanks. It was an urban legend passed around by families as a warning to keep their older relatives alert. However, within the last few years, the old playground rules of phone fraud have completely evaporated. This urban legend migrated from a cheap con into a terrifying, automated weapon of pure psychological warfare. And the most chilling part about it is that it is completely real, backed by actual FBI warnings and devastating police logs. The nightmare relies on generative text-to-speech AI. Today, a cybercriminal doesn't need to be a coding genius or have access to a multi-million-dollar dark web laboratory. They just download a cheap mass-market voice cloning app on their phone. To train the AI to perfectly replicate a human being, the software doesn't need hours of studio-quality audio anymore. It requires a sample as short as a 3-second burst. Think about your own digital footprint, or the digital footprint of your kids. Every public TikTok video, every Instagram reel, every YouTube clip, or even an outgoing custom voicemail greeting is an open warehouse of audio. The scammer scrapes a few seconds of a teenager's voice from a social media post, feeds it into the algorithm, and the software instantly learns the exact vocal cadence, the unique pitch, the subtle breathing patterns, and the emotional distress inflections of that specific human being. When the scammer types text into the app, the AI translates those words into a flawless, living vocal duplicate. If you think this is a dystopian exaggeration, look at the staggering case files from federal law enforcement. In 2023, an Arizona mother named Jennifer DeStefano answered a call from an unknown number. She heard her 15-year-old daughter sobbing frantically, saying she had messed up and was being held captive. A man immediately took over the call, demanding a $1 million ransom. The vocal simulation was so precise, so absolutely indistinguishable from her daughter's real voice, that Jennifer's logical faculties completely shut down. It was only because she had family nearby who managed to independently call the daughter's school that she discovered the truth. Her daughter was sitting safely in class, entirely oblivious to the fact that an artificial ghost was being used to extort her mother. Other families haven't been so lucky. In California, a mother named Deborah Del Mastro was targeted by scammers claiming her adult daughter had been seized by a cartel. She listened to what she was certain was her daughter having a severe hyperventilating panic attack on the phone, begging for her life. The scammers weaponized the manufactured grief to keep Deborah trapped on the line for nearly 5 hours, giving her frantic driving instructions and bleeding her bank account over $5,000 through untraceable wire transfers before she could finally break away to call her real daughter, who was simply sitting quietly at her desk at work. According to official data released by the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, Americans lost nearly $900 million in a single year to scams powered directly by artificial intelligence. The legend of the AI voice clone represents the ultimate terrifying evolution of Tier 4 infrastructural dread. It proves that in a hyper-connected society, we have built a digital panopticon, which is a design for an institutional building, most famously prisons, where a single watchman can observe all the inmates without being able to tell whether they are actually being watched, where our most intimate data is continuously weaponized against us. The urban legend is no longer about a monster hiding in the woods or an axe man under a bridge. The monster is an invisible mirror, a digital script running on a server thousands of miles away, capable of stealing the voices of people you love the most, turning their agony into a commodity, and using your own primal evolutionary survival instinct to completely destroy you. Welcome to the future, everyone. Isn't it everything you had hoped for? Well, as you're about to see as we continue, it gets much worse. The next legend in Tier 4 is the living room live stream. It's 1 a.m., and your apartment is completely pitch black, save for the blue light glow of your smartphone screen. You're lying on your couch, half asleep, mindlessly scrolling through your social media feeds to pass the time. Perhaps you're watching Chilled Bones on YouTube right now, enjoying an evening of high strangeness. It's possible. You swipe past a few comedy clips, a recipe, then you stumble onto a live broadcast from an unlisted, anonymous account. The video feed is dark, casting an eerie, low-resolution view of a modern living room. You pause your thumb because a strange knot is formed in your stomach. The layout of the apartment in the live stream looks disturbingly familiar. You eye the specific shape of the coffee table, the angle of the bookshelf, and the distinct shadow of a houseplant in the corner. Suddenly, the camera pans slightly to the left, focusing on the center of the room. It reveals a clear, live shot of the back of a person's head slouched on a couch, staring down at a glowing smartphone screen. The cold shock of adrenaline violently wakes your entire nervous system. You realize you're looking at a live broadcast of yourself. Your mind spins frantically, scanning the room for an intruder. You look toward the windows, the balcony, the closet doors. They're all tightly closed. There's no one else in the room. Then you look straight ahead, and your eyes lock onto the thin, glossy bezel of your high-definition smart TV sitting on the entertainment stand. Nestled directly inside the top plastic frame is a tiny glass camera lens, and its green recording light indicator is softly pulsing in the dark. For generations, the voyeur in the walls, or the peeping Tom, was a localized, old-school urban legend. It was a story passed around about a hidden crawl space behind a bathroom mirror, or a physical stalker drilling tiny peepholes through a motel wall. It was a localized, physical invasion of privacy. But as modern consumer culture shifted, the urban legend evolved into a digitized, borderless nightmare. The myth of the smart TV live stream has become the definitive cautionary tale of the smart home era, passed around on tech forums and corporate offices as something that happened to a friend of mine's roommate or somebody. It turns the center of the modern living room entertainment, the screen we look at to relax and escape reality, into an unblinking predatory eye. And if you think this is just a paranoid creepypasta cooked up by a tech-phobos Luddite, you haven't looked at the cybersecurity logs or the official federal warnings that have quietly reshaped the consumer electronics industry. The vulnerability isn't a supernatural glitch. It's an issue of automated, unfirewalled infrastructure. When smart TVs exploded onto the consumer market in the 2010s, manufacturers raced to load them with advanced features to outpace the competitors, integrating built-in webcams, voice-activated microphones, and facial recognition sensors so users could make video calls or navigate menus with hand gestures. But in the corporate rush for marketplace dominance, cybersecurity was treated as an afterthought. These devices were shipped with a weak, rudimentary operating system, zero built-in antivirus software, and default, easily guessable factory passwords. The FBI's Oregon field office took unprecedented steps of issuing an official public warning specifically targeting smart TVs. Law enforcement explicitly stated that unsecured television webcams provide a wide-open digital backdoor for malicious actors. By using automated scanning scripts on the internet, black hat hackers can easily locate unprotected, internet-connected TVs, bypass the weak security walls, and silently commandeer the camera and microphone. The terrifying reality of this urban legend came to a head when white hat security researchers demonstrated just how defenseless these screens truly are. At a major cybersecurity convention, analysts demonstrated an exploit targeting popular smart TV models. Without ever touching the physical television, hackers thousands of miles away could remotely inject a malicious script through the user's home Wi-Fi network. They could silently activate the built-in webcam, completely bypass the television's physical power status, and stream crystal clear, high-definition video of a family's private living room directly onto the dark web, all while the television screen appeared to be completely turned off and asleep. Even worse, hackers have hijacked the administrative controls of these devices to display terrifying custom extortion messages directly on screen, locking families out of their own appliances until a cryptocurrency ransom is paid. The legend of the living room live stream represents the ultimate terrifying decay of modern domestic privacy. It targets the visceral contemporary anxiety that by surrounding ourselves with unfirewalled smart technology for the sake of everyday convenience, we have voluntarily built the perfect automated surveillance grid against ourselves. This urban legend strips away the illusion of the home as a sanctuary. It forces you to realize that when you turn off the lights and sit alone in the dark, you might not be the audience anymore. You might just be content for a faceless viewer watching you from the other side of the glass you're currently staring into. And now we move on to what I believe is the most horrifying urban legend out of everything we've talked about tonight. Because I really hate to say it, folks, but this one is totally true. The fake rideshare. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, and you're standing outside a crowded downtown bar or a quiet airport terminal, desperate to get home. Your feet ache, your phone battery is sitting at a fragile 5%, and the night air has a bitter, unforgiving chill. You pull out your phone, swipe for a ride, and the app promises a vehicle is 4 minutes away. You slip the phone back into your pocket and wait. Then, a pair of headlights round the corner. A clean, mid-sized black sedan pulls smoothly up to the curb, stopping exactly where you are standing. In your exhaustion, you don't double-check the license plate. You don't verify the driver's face on your screen. You're simply cold and relieved to see a vehicle. The driver looks over, gives a polite nod, and clicks the door unlocked. You open the back door, slide into the back seat, and close it behind you. The air inside the cabin is thick, smelling faintly of stale pine air freshener and industrial cleaning wipes. "Hey," you say, settling in. "Thanks for coming so fast." The driver doesn't say a word. He doesn't look back at you in the rearview mirror. He just shifts the car into drive, pulls away from the curve, moving seamlessly into the dark night. The first mile, everything feels normal. You lean your head against the cool glass of the window, watching the streetlights stream past in a hypnotic rhythm. Then you hear a small sound. It's a sharp, heavy, mechanical double click. The automatic door locks have engaged. You don't think anything of it at first, but a moment later, you notice the turn. Your apartment is located straight north up a brightly lit avenue. The driver, however, has just veered sharply east, heading down a completely unlit road that leads towards an isolated industrial park. "Excuse me," you say, your voice sounding a bit smaller than you had intended. I think you missed the turn for the highway." There's no response. The back of the driver's head is completely rigid. He doesn't adjust his hands on the wheel, and he doesn't slow down. He just keeps staring straight ahead. "Sir?" You lean forward. That is when the cold panic sets in. On the dashboard, where a glowing phone mount should be, where the GPS map should be tracking your ride, there's absolutely nothing. Just an empty plastic clip. Your heart takes a violent drop into your stomach. You reach for the door handle and pull it. It moves, but the door won't budge. You pull it harder, rattling the plastic casing. You try to push the manual locking pin up, but it's completely unresponsive. The child safety locks have been physically engaged from outside before you even got in this car. The realization hits you all at once. You didn't check the plate. You didn't ask him who he was picking up. He doesn't have a rideshare app running. This isn't an Uber or a Lyft. This is just a predator who was waiting in the dark for someone to climb into the wrong car. And you have voluntarily locked yourself inside his rolling cage. The streetlights disappear entirely as the sedan accelerates, taking a hard turn down an unmapped gravel road. You slam your palms against the window glass, screaming into the empty night, while the driver slowly looks up, catches your eyes in the rearview mirror, and smiles. This is the absolute pinnacle of Tier 4 horror because it completely subverts a mundane, automated ritual of modern convenience. For decades, urban legends warned us about hitchhikers on the side of the road. But in the modern gig economy, the myth has completely reversed. Now, the danger isn't the stranger you pick up, it's the stranger you willingly pay to pick you up. And while it reads like a Hollywood thriller, this specific urban legend is anchored to a devastating, highly documented criminal reality. Predators frequently stalk entertainment districts, college campuses, and transit hubs at closing time, explicitly looking for targets who are distracted, intoxicated, or glued to their phones. The most prominent and tragic real-world case occurred in March 2019 in Columbia, South Carolina. A 21-year-old university student named Samantha Josephson left a bar at 2 a.m. and mistakenly climbed into a black Chevrolet Impala, driven by a man named Nathaniel Rowland, believing it was her ordered Uber. The moment she closed the door, Rowland engaged the vehicle's manual child safety locks, completely trapping her in the back seat before driving her to a remote, wooded location. This heartbreaking incident shook the nation and directly led to the introduction of Sam's Law, which mandated stricter background checks and highly visible, scannable identification markers for all rideshare vehicles. A similar pattern emerged in Boston, Massachusetts, where law enforcement arrested a suspect named Alvin Campbell. Prosecutors revealed that Campbell would deliberately cruise outside crowded downtown bars at closing time, pulling up to the curb and waiting for vulnerable, tired patrons to mistakenly identify his vehicle as their ride home, using the child lock mechanism to isolate them inside. Even internationally, this modern urban legend persists. In 2025, British authorities sentenced a predator named Graham Head to 18 years in prison. Head went so far as to print custom fake business cards labeled Nuber to legitimize his operation, deliberately cruising nightlife areas to trick young women into entering his locked vehicle. The fake rideshare urban legend functions as a profound modern anxiety tale. It forces a contemporary audience to confront just how much personal autonomy we surrender to algorithms every single day. We blindly trust a glowing screen, drop our guard, and climb into a stranger's locked metal box in the middle of the night. It reminds us that the thin veneer of safety provided by technology is incredibly fragile, and that a simple moment of distraction is all it takes to step out of civilization and into the abyss. Conclusion. And there you have it. We started on the surface and worked our way down, laughing at cursed paintings, hatchet-wielding maniacs in your back seat, and a terrifying face you summoned in a mirror just by saying her name. Then we lowered the crane all the way down until we were staring into the literal abyss of child safety locks, backseat predators, and the realization that your Alexa might just be laughing at you in the dark. What's fascinating about this entire descent is how the nature of the monster changes the deeper you go. At the top, the boogeymen are simple. They have hooks for hands. They haunt mirrors. Or they're cursed paintings that somehow survive a house fire thanks to some cheap industrial varnish. They are external things. They're things that we can lock outside. But down here at the bottom, the technology changes. The infrastructure upgrades. But the core horror stays exactly the same. The urban legends stop being about monsters hiding in the woods and they start being about us. They become a mirror reflecting our own modern paranoias, the terrifying realization that by filling our homes with smart devices and turning our lives over to algorithmic convenience, we essentially built the world's most efficient tracking network for an invisible predator to sit right beside us. We're willing to climb into the backseat of a stranger's locked metal box at 2 o'clock in the morning because a glowing rectangle told us to. So the next time you check into a mid-tier motel and it smells a little too heavily of industrial Febreze, maybe don't look under the bed. Just leave a bad review on Yelp and sleep in your car. You'll be much safer. If you survived this descent down the urban legends iceberg, and you want to ensure the faceless algorithm keeps serving you up this flavor of institutional dread, go ahead and hit the like and subscribe buttons. Slide into the comments and let me know which legend genuinely gave you the chills. And smash that subscribe button so you never miss another deep dive. If you're into the creepy and macabre, which I imagine you are, and you'd like to read some truly scary stories, check out my novels. I've written several of them, guaranteed to give you many sleepless nights with the lights on and the covers pulled over your head. You can find out more about my books and my writing on my website, chilledbones.com. We're just now scratching the surface of what's waiting in the dark, so keep coming back for more institutional dread, horror, and high strangeness. I'm Robert Ference, and this is Chilled Bones.